Archaeologists have uncovered the secret of miniature Bibles that are about 1,000 years old. In South America, they unearthed the grave of a man from myths. And in Germany, scientists have studied the ancient navel of a dinosaur. About these finds and more, see in this video. Hi friend, you are on the KirTop channel. The ancient genome of Escherichia coli. When you think of royal jewels, a 400-year-old gallstone is unlikely to come to mind. However, a group of scientists have discovered something of great value inside calcified pellets taken from the gallbladder of an Italian prince who passed away in the 16th century. Remains of early E. coli have been found in gallstones, and researchers at Canada's McMaster University have used them to reconstruct the first ancient genome of E. coli bacteria. This is necessary in order to trace the evolution of the notorious superbacteria over the past 400 years. The results, published in the journal Communications Biology, may allow researchers to eventually determine when E. coli acquired antibiotic resistance. Gallstones are visible in the red rectangle, which contain fragments of E. coli. The mummified remains of Giovanni da Vallos were discovered in the Abbey of St. Domenico Maggiore in Naples in 1983, along with those of other Italian Renaissance nobles. It is believed that a Neapolitan nobleman who died in 1586, at the age of 48, suffered from chronic inflammation of the gallbladder due to gallstones. In addition to forming gallstones, E. coli can cause food poisoning, diarrhea, urinary tract infections, and pneumonia. Escherichia coli is also known to be resistant to antibiotics, giving it the name superbug. The research team explained that the full evolutionary history of the bacterium remains a mystery, including when it acquired resistance to antibiotics. This is yet to be found out. Tax documents and shopping lists. The Egyptian mummy of Chaddingstone Castle in Kent has long been a mystery to experts. In order to read the name of the deceased, it was necessary to unfold the burial veil of strips of papyrus pages, which was impossible without damaging the mummy. In 2017, researchers developed a scanning method that allowed the hidden text to be read without harming the mummy. The 3,000-year-old mummy of a man named Eretirore. Used papyrus was used to form the mummy's wrappings, but the text on it was obscured by putty and plaster, so the contents remained unknown for centuries. During the scan, scientists saw, in addition to the name, records of the life of the Egyptians, including tax documents and shopping lists. China kept secret discovered 12th century frigate. The find led to the emergence of a museum of underwater archaeology in China. In 1987, the British firm Maritime Exploration was looking for the wreck of the Dutch East India Company in the South China Sea, but instead came across a 30-meter merchant ship dating from the Southern Song period, 12th century. Divers reported that the sunken ship, judging by the amount of cargo, was at the very beginning of its journey. The wreck was nicknamed Nanhai No. 1 because it was the first find off the coast of the city of the same name. A layer of silt 2 meters thick contributed to the preservation of the wooden hull and cargo, including porcelain, sung coins, and silver bars. The lack of investment and suitable technology meant that Nanhai No. 1 remained untouched on the seabed until 2002. All this time it was watched by the Chinese naval forces. The military stopped local fishermen from fishing on the site, claiming that there were still active bombs from the Second World War on it. Only in December 2007, the Nanhai No. 1 and its precious contents, with a total weight of 15,600 tons, were finally lifted from the bottom and transferred to the Silk Road Maritime Museum in Guangdong on Hailing Island, which was built specifically to accommodate the sunken ship. It became the first museum of underwater archaeology in China. Nanhai No. 1 has been placed in a custom-made seawater tank, and to prevent rotting and damage to the ship, it is covered with silt and kept at a stable temperature. Under these carefully controlled conditions, archaeologists have continued to study the wreck ever since. For example, in 2018, scientists established the dates of a sea voyage. One of the jars was dated 1183. Earlier, the Colombian military showed photos from the sunken frigate of the 16th century. The ship has not yet been explored, but perhaps its raising will inspire the Spaniards to create their own underwater museum. Stone cubes. Not far from Albuquerque, New Mexico, a group of tourists came to the edge of a canyon. At first glance, they are ordinary rock formations, but the longer you look, the more you get the feeling that something is wrong. The edges of the cliffs are perfectly straight. The edges are smooth, as if they were cut not by time, but by something sharp. In some places, the stone masses form clear cubes. Each weighs about 100 tons. There are no signs of processing, but there is no chaos of nature here either. Everything is too geometric. Comparisons immediately began online. Someone remembered the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, mysterious stone slabs going underwater. Someone, the megaliths of Baalbek. But still, the main reaction is the same. It looks wrong, too right to be natural, too unwieldy to be man-made. Scientists, of course, can explain a lot. Weathering, crystal geometry, pressure, faults. But visually, it is not convincing, because when you stand next to these forms, you do not get the feeling that nature did this. The question arises, if it is really artificial, then who did this and why? This is not the first and not the last place where nature seems to accidentally depict someone's work. But sometimes there is a suspicion that everything is the other way around. That it is not nature that imitates technology, but we who have not yet understood who was here before us. The flesh of the fish god. The Dogon people live in the cliffs of Bandiagara. Once every 60 years, they hold the Sigi festival. The main ritual is to bring out a huge mask of Nomo. According to legend, Nomo is an amphibious creature. It once flew in a copper egg that thundered like a thunderstorm, fell into the lake, and came out of the capsule half man, half fish. Nomo showed people star drawings. It indicated that next to the bright Sirius there is another, dark and very heavy star. Astronomers discovered this white dwarf, Sirius B, only in the 19th century, but the Dogon talked about it long before telescopes. So that his lesson would not be forgotten, Nomo, according to myth, shared flesh, gave people pieces of his skin as sacred food. That is why the Dogon still call his power Nyama Nomu, life inside the fish god. They keep clay tablets with a pair of stars in secret sanctuaries. Scientists still cannot understand whether this is ancient knowledge or a late hint from missionaries, but the Dogon themselves are sure. The copper egg really did fly in and will return one day when the time comes for the next Sigi. The history of UFOs is always a mixture of fear, technology, and myths. Let's keep this in mind and move on. The most dangerous manuscript in the world. Marie Curie is a famous experimental scientist, an outstanding chemist, and a radioactivity researcher who received 2 Nobel Prizes, one in 1903 in physics, the second in 1911 in chemistry. But why are her notebooks considered dangerous? The answer does not lie in the knowledge they contain. Marie Curie, together with her husband Pierre Curie, discovered the radioactive elements polonium and radium and developed methods for isolating radioactive isotopes. When scientists discovered radium, they had no idea about its harm to the body. Therefore, no protective measures were taken. Samples of the substance were carried in pockets and stored without precautions. Marie Curie died in 1934 from aplastic anemia, a blood disease caused by radiation. Many of the scientists who worked with her also died of leukemia and other radiation-related diseases. While working in the laboratory, Curie received a huge dose of radiation and became radioactive herself. After her death, she was buried in a lead coffin that blocks radiation. Personal belongings, including notebooks, were transferred to the National Library of France, where they are stored in lead boxes, as they remain radioactive. Today, access to Marie Curie's notebooks is difficult. To view her manuscripts, you must sign a disclaimer form at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and obtain permission. Viewing of records takes place in a special room away from other reading rooms of the library. The visitor must wear a protective suit and use a dosimeter. Experts have found that the radiation dose for a person in a protective suit working with Curie notebooks is insignificant. Even with regular contact throughout the year, the maximum radiation dose will be about 10 USV microsievert per hour. For comparison, during a flight at an altitude of 10 kilometers, a person receives 5 MSVH. Thus, a 2-hour flight from Berlin to Barcelona will give the same radiation dose as a year of working with Curie notebooks. The Curie notebooks remain the most dangerous known manuscripts due to radioactivity. Reading them without a protective suit is extremely dangerous. Marie Curie's personal belongings will not be touched without protection for about 1,500 years, since the half-life of radium-226 is 1,600 years. Merlin's parchment. Archives often look boring. Dusty folders, bills, names of long-forgotten people. And so it was in Suffolk County, in an old English estate, an ordinary 16th-century ledger, and suddenly, under the leather binding, old French text with red and blue initials appears. The archivist stops. An investigation begins that will lead to the most mysterious legend of Britain, the story of Merlin and King Arthur. The parchment turned out to be a fragment of a 13th century manuscript, when legends about the Knights of the Round Table were at the peak of their popularity. Specifically, it is part of the sweet Vulgate du Merlin cycle, plots describing how Merlin acted after Arthur's coronation. Less than 40 such copies have survived, and each one is unique. But this one was sewn into the cover, like trash, because in the 16th century, old parchments were often used for bindings. The paper was expensive. Scientists could not touch the find. It was too fragile. Then technology came into play. Multispectral imaging revealed faded ink. X-rays created to study fossils allowed us to look inside the book. And it became clear, this is a new scene, previously unknown. 2 episodes. In the first, Gawain fights the pagan kings at Cambanic. In the second, a blind harpist with a white dog appears during a feast. He charms everyone, asks permission to carry the standard in battle, and disappears. Then it becomes clear that it was Merlin who changed the course of events. Magic, a mask, a legend. But this is not the main thing. The main thing is that all this could have remained in the cover forever. The story written by monks 7 centuries ago survived dozens of generations, wars, oblivion, and surfaced only because one person noticed a strange pattern on old skin. The Black Book of Carmarthen. The oldest manuscript that mentions King Arthur and Merlin is the Black Book from Carmarthen. The book is considered a collection of poems from the 9th and 12th centuries. In 2015, the pages were examined with UV light and photo editing. To the delight of the researchers, they found something invisible to the naked eye. Among the lines were hidden human faces and poems. Also in the margins, medieval readers, mostly at the end of the 16th century, made notes. The manuscript is the earliest manuscript written in Welsh around 1250 AD. It was probably created by a single author who collected poems about Welsh folk stories and legends from the Dark Ages. But the Black Book's greatest significance is how it demonstrates that even well-researched manuscripts can provide a wealth of new information. The grave of a man from myth. A significant part of the scientific community denies the very existence of the Aztlan culture. In the Mexican city of Mazatlan, repairmen accidentally discovered ancient human remains. The work was immediately stopped so that the employees of the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico, INAH, carried out archaeological excavations. According to archaeologist Victor Joel Santos Ramirez, rescue coordinator, the area is a natural high hill near the mouth of the El Colite River. In pre-Hispanic times, people settled there in order, on the one hand, to live near the river and use its resources, and on the other, to avoid seasonal flooding. Part of the surface of the hill was covered with crushed shells, but under this impromptu floor was a human burial. It is definitely unusual. Let's start with the fact that archaeologists have found the remains of only one person. That is, this is not a cemetery, not a place of regular burials. At the same time, 3 fragmented ceramic vessels of rather fine workmanship and a smoking pipe were found in the burial. The preservation of human remains is very poor due to local climatic conditions. The found burial, therefore, strongly stands out from the local burial tradition. Mexican archaeologists have suggested that they have found the tomb of Aztlan, a man from Aztlan, the mythical homeland of the Aztecs. In general, today there is no evidence that Aztlan ever existed anywhere other than myths. In the scientific community, it is perceived as something between Atlantis and Camelot, but they are looking for it with undying persistence, including for political reasons. Scholars agree that the Aztecs roamed North America for a long time before founding Tenochtitlan in 1325, and around the same time the emergence of the legend of Aztlan is attributed. The myths do not contain exact indications of where it was. It is only clear that north of Tenochtitlan. The description is also rather poor, a small island in a lake inhabited by herons. Based on these, frankly, poor signs, at the end of the 19th century, Mexican historians announced that Aztlan was located on Mezcaltitan, a small island in mangrove swamps. Ghost ships in the air. I want to tell you about 2 of the most famous ghost ships from the Norwegian sagas. The first case is the Trøndelag Fjord around 875. Fishermen were pulling their nets and suddenly saw a drakkar right above the tops of the pine trees. It was moving quietly, without wind. The sail glowed bluish, as if illuminated from within. One guy, not believing his eyes, threw a harpoon. The rope tensed as if it had caught something heavy, but at the same moment the ship became transparent and dissolved. The harpoon plopped back onto the grass, wet as if it had broken through the fog. The second episode happened 3 centuries later on the island of Klosteroi. It was Sunday lunch. People were in church. Suddenly a small ship hung over the roof. The boards and mast were translucent like smoke in the sun. The anchor dropped and tenaciously clung to the roof. A sailor came down from the hatch, but he moved strangely, as if the air around him was thick. The priest told the parishioners not to panic and to help. The men climbed onto the roof, lifted the anchor, and immediately the ship was pulled upward. The sailor climbed up the chain, the Drakkar slowly went into the clouds and disappeared. Scientists explain these stories in earthly terms. Mirages, fata morganas, or bright northern lights that people drew to the familiar shape of a ship. But in both stories, there are too many everyday details. A sail, a rope, the weight of iron in their hands. Therefore, for folklore, these are not just lights in the sky, but real encounters with something foreign, translated into the language of sailors. Legends have lived for more than 1,000 years. Sometimes in Norway, they still say that before a storm over the fjord, you can see a Drakkar that goes not on the water, but right in the sky. Stoned room. High in the Andes, in the ancient complex of Chavan de Huantar, archaeologists stumbled upon a room they weren't supposed to find. It was completely closed, with no visible entrances, no windows, no doors, just a narrow opening, as if someone had deliberately hidden this space from prying eyes. Inside, there are 23 artifacts. All are related to the use of psychoactive substances. Some are thin, hollow bird bones, sharp, perfectly processed like pipes. Research has shown that they contain traces of tobacco and DMT, a substance found in ayahuasca. And here are the questions that arise. What was this small, dark room with inhalation pipes for? Why was it isolated? Why was it built in such a way that it would then be hidden forever? One of the authors of the study says, "This is not spontaneous shamanism. This is a ritual, strictly controlled, formalized, and perhaps it was not meant for everyone. Only the elite had access to these practices, perhaps the priests or the ruling castes, because hallucinations here are not just a journey inside oneself, they are a mechanism of power. A small room, 2 or 3 people, darkness, and a hallucinogen that changes the perception of reality. Such conditions could form contact with the gods, trance, visions, and if ordinary people believed that the priest really talked to spirits, then the priest could use this as a tool, both for control and for management." Palm scroll. In 1938, an amazing discovery was made in India. Ancient palm scrolls containing extensive knowledge about medicine, astronomy, and other sciences. These scrolls are over 4,000 years old, making them one of the oldest libraries in the world. The contents of the scrolls are striking in their diversity. From medical treatises describing the treatment of various diseases to astronomical records detailing the movements of planets and stars. These scrolls represent an invaluable cultural heritage that provides a window into the world of ancient knowledge and practices. They confirm the high level of development of science and medicine in ancient India. Of particular interest is the technique of their creation and preservation. Palm leaves, carefully processed and recorded, could store information for thousands of years. Grave of Tolas Shad. In 2017, a stone monument dedicated to a powerful man and the struggle for power was found in the Mongolian steppe. It consists of 14 pillars arranged around a 1,300-year-old sarcophagus, which is now empty. Like columns, it is covered with Turkic inscriptions documenting data about some person. In the centuries before Genghis Khan, the influence of this man was second only to the ruler, the Khagan Bilge Khan Bogü, ruled the Eastern Turkic Khaganate in 716-734. It was written on the pillars that the deceased owned the title of Yagbu. After the poisoning of Bilge, the man received the position of Tolas Shad, ruler of the East. This assassination is mentioned in historical records, and it is not clear if the vicegerent was featured in it. Thousands of mummies in one place. The Capuchin catacombs are the world-famous burial dungeons in Palermo, Sicily, southern Italy. There are more than 8,000 mummified bodies of people who died between the 17th and 19th centuries. Today, the Capuchin catacombs are one of the main attractions of Palermo. In 1599, the Capuchin monks made a shocking discovery during the exhumation of bodies that were removed from the catacombs under the monastery in Palermo. Many of the bodies were naturally mummified. Features of the soil and microclimate prevented the decomposition of the bodies. After this discovery, the monks decided to mummify one of their dead, Silvestro of Gubbio, by placing the deceased in the catacombs. Soon, the bodies of the dead monks and even noble citizens of Palermo began to be demolished in the catacombs. Later, the catacombs became a kind of status symbol. It was considered prestigious to be buried in the Capuchin catacombs. The bodies were first dehydrated by laying them on racks of ceramic pipes in the catacombs for 8 months and then washed with vinegar. Some bodies were embalmed while others were placed in airtight glass cabinets. The monks were buried in their daily clothes. Some of the dead wrote wills specifying what clothes they should be buried in. Some even asked to have their clothes changed several times a year according to the latest fashion. Relatives went to the catacombs to pray for the dead and keep their bodies in a presentable condition. Capuchin monks took money for the maintenance of huge catacombs from relatives of the dead. During World War II, American bombers accidentally hit the monastery, causing many of the mummies to be destroyed. Today, about 8,000 bodies and 1,252 mummies can be found along the walls of the catacombs. The halls are divided into 7 categories: men, women, girls, children, priests, monks, and scholars. Mini Bibles. During the 13th century, thousands of mini Bibles were produced to carry in your pocket. The tiny books were made using technology that was hitherto unknown. Although the pages were made of leather, they were stunningly thin and were claimed to have been made from fetal calf skin. But the number of books made this impossible. The researchers suggested that rabbits, rats, and squirrels were the sources of leather for the books. But it turned out that the pages were made not from the skin of rodents, but from the skin of cows, goats, and sheep. It solved one of the biggest mysteries of the pre-press era. The Bible was written by hand. Although some of the skin may indeed have been taken from unborn animals, this has not been confirmed for most of the books. This raised the question of how pages that were tough enough to last 800 years could be so thin. Some were 0.03 millimeters thick. But by the time medieval sources began to record the methods of creating pages, the process had already been lost. Flying chariots. Ancient Indian poems describe flying machines as if they were reports on modern technology. In the Ramayana, Prince Rama rises into the sky in the Pushpaka Vimana. The body is shiny. The windows are illuminated. The craft takes off vertically, like the sun, raised by thought. In the Mahabharata, 2 Vimanas engage in battle, release metal arrows that resound like thunder, and depart, leaving behind a tail of fire. Later, in the Samarangana Sutradhara, 11th century, King Bhoja suddenly speaks in almost technical language. Inside the Vimana, there is a mercury chamber surrounded by iron rings. When the mercury is heated, a force is created that carries the device through the air. Scholars argue how much of these texts is real memory and how much is poetic metaphor. But the details are striking. The mention of mercury as a working fluid, the description of a vertical takeoff, a separate shield to protect the passenger from the heat. On the frescoes of Ellora and the walls of Angkor, you can see streamlined capsules with a cone of fire below, too similar to a jet stream to be an accident. Skeptics remind us the manuscripts are late, they could have been forged by alchemists. Mercury has always been a symbol of immortality for the Indians. But why then do they depict not gods on a cloud in the temples, but clearly mechanical machines? So far, not a single archaeologist has found material details of the Vimana, but the legends are alive. In India today, they say that heavenly chariots will return when people again understand the language of metal and mercury. Perhaps a hint that the technology is still stored somewhere. Skulls with nails. In the southeast of Spain, among the ruins of ancient settlements, archaeologists have found something that immediately evokes an alarming feeling. 7 severed heads. Some have huge metal nails driven into them, not all the way through, but with obvious force, as if the skulls had been nailed to something. But why? At first they thought trophies of war, like the heads of enemies, displayed to intimidate. But a chemical analysis of the bones gave an unexpected result. Not all the skulls were foreign. In one city, 3 out of 4 heads belonged to people who came from afar, and in another, almost all were local. And this changes everything. because in one place, strangers were apparently executed and put on display, and in another, their ancestors were kept as relics. The heads were found near houses, inside dwellings. So, this is no longer a demonstration of force, it is memory and respect. The Greeks wrote that the Gauls kept the heads of their enemies in boxes, and that Spanish mercenaries carried them on spears. But in reality, everything was more complicated. Mysterious accessory from the future. Archaeologists have discovered wall carvings depicting objects similar to modern handbags. Some of these images are about 12,000 years old. The earliest were found in Turkey in the ruins of the megalithic temple of Göbekli Tepe, where strange images are engraved on the columns of the ancient temple. Similar motifs have been discovered in Mexico, Iraq, and South America, raising many questions about the possible use of such objects by ancient civilizations. Although the images resemble handbags or clutches, experts believe the ancient ruins are more likely to depict baskets. Some believe that the concept of a handbag may have been invented by ancient civilizations. The first modern bag appeared in 1841 in England, created by Samuel Parkinson. The problem is that the Göbekli Tepe temple was built in 9000 BC, and its builders could hardly have known about such an accessory. Another ancient example of a handbag was found in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs written about 5,000 years ago, where the gods hold a small square object symbolizing prosperity. Archaeologists have indeed found remains of baskets and tool bags used by the ancient Egyptians, but they cannot yet say for sure what is depicted in the hieroglyphs. Similar discoveries were made in Iraq, among the ruins of an Assyrian palace built between 883 and 859 BC, which depicts a genie with wings holding what appears to be a handbag. Historian David Miano believes that these figures, called Apkallu, were minor deities who carried water buckets made from sacred date palms rather than purses. Ancient buckets similar to the engravings were actually found in Iraq. Similar motifs have also been found in Mexico among Toltec ruins, where giant statues hold objects resembling handbags. These statues were created around 750 AD. The world's first fossilized navel of a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are usually depicted as majestic, almost fantastic creatures. It is almost impossible to imagine that they really existed in the real world, walked on the same earth as people. However, scientists have discovered a unique fossil that instantly makes dinosaurs a little more alive. It turns out that ancient reptiles had the equivalent of a navel. Researchers recently studied the first known fossil of such a mark. Let me remind you that in humans and other mammals, the navel remains after the umbilical cord that connected it in the womb with the mother's placenta falls off the newborn. Dinosaur embryos did not have umbilical cords, and they developed inside the egg, not in the female's abdomen. The embryo was attached directly to the yolk sac of its egg, and nutrients entered the body of the embryo through a slit-like opening in the abdominal cavity. From this gap, a long, thin umbilical scar remained, which remained on the skin throughout the life of the dinosaur. The specimen, which drew the attention of an international team of paleontologists, was discovered back in 2002 and has since been exhibited at the Senckenberg Museum in Germany. The fossilized skin belonged to Psittacosaurus, a herbivorous dinosaur about 2 meters long that lived on Earth 130 million years ago. The specimen was found in China, and until recently, no one noticed the navel on it. The researchers found the scar on the petrified skin using a relatively new technique called laser-induced fluorescence imaging, LSF. So scientists identified the characteristic scales surrounding the long umbilical scar of Psittacosaurus. Similar scars can be seen in some modern lizards and crocodiles. The terrible face of an ancient man. Scientists have figured out what an ancient human ancestor looked like, a Cro-Magnon man, whose skeleton was discovered in the Isis cave in France. The face of the Cro-Magnon turned out to be truly creepy. As it turned out, he suffered from neurofibromatosis, a genetic disease that causes massive growth of benign tumors. They covered the entire face of an ancient man. The skeleton of Cro-Magnon 1, a member of the species Homo sapiens who lived about 28,000 years ago, was discovered in 1868 in the Isis cave in the French region of Dordogne in southwestern France. By the 150th anniversary of the discovery, scientists decided to re-examine the remains, restoring the appearance of a Cro-Magnon man. Cro-Magnons are the ancient ancestors of man. Their remains were first discovered in the middle of the 19th century in the Dogon region, in the Cro-Magnon cave from which they got their name. The Cro-Magnons found by scientists lived on Earth 35,000 years ago and were the first of the ancestors of modern man whose remains were discovered by scientists. Marriage contract. Around 4,000 years ago, a couple etched their marriage contract in clay. When this clay tablet was found in 2017 at the Kultepe archaeological site in Turkey, it soon became clear that most of the contract involved children. An Assyrian couple, Lakipum and Hatala, agreed to try to produce their own offspring within 2 years. In case that there would be no children, then the wife had to find a surrogate mother. More specifically, Hatala had to buy a female slave for her husband. After the birth of the child, Lakipumu was allowed to sell the mother if he wanted to. The contract is the oldest to mention surrogacy and infertility, although in a slightly different light than today. While this reflects the ancient belief that infertility was the wife's fault, the contract covered a divorce. The person who initiated the divorce had to pay the other person 5 measures of silver. Rate this video with your thumbs up or down and subscribe to the channel. And I will not disregard any of all your kind comments. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone.